Do you want to catch more bass on a jig? Well, in today's video, these are the things that you should consider before choosing one. With hundreds, if not thousands of jigs on the market, I'm going to break down which ones are actually good so you can save your money and catch more fish. Today, we're going to walk through the 3 most important pieces of information when it comes to fishing a jig: your head shape, your color, and your trailer selection. We will break down each one of those sections in today's video to make sure that you can choose the right one for your scenario and make sure you have the most amount of success on the water. Let's get started with the most important piece, your jig head shape. This is literally going to determine where you can fish your jig or where you cannot fish your jig. If you choose the wrong head shape, you're going to have a ton of issues working your bait through the cover properly and ultimately catching more fish. And while every brand out there will have their own unique head shape and they might have a slight modification to each one of these, they will fall into 3 major categories that we are going to break down in today's video. Starting with the most common one, you're going to see some type of a flipping jig. Now, like these ones that I make myself, they have an arc-shaped head and they have a flat line tie that follows that arc-shaped head to allow it to work its way over wood. That's what these are designed to do. Now, they will work through grass a little bit and maybe some rock, but these really shine in wood cover. If you're fishing laydowns and other trees in the water, that arc-shaped head is going to allow it to crawl through those branches. Now, I have a couple others here that are still flipping jigs, but they have a slightly different head shape. So something like the 6th Sense hybrid jig, it still has that arc shaped and it has that flat tie that follows that shape, but instead of it being flat, it is in line with the bait. So even though it's in line with the bait, it will allow it to still work through that wood and not get hung up. I have another one here that I believe this is actually a Strike King one. And again, it still has that banana shaped head and this line tie is flat like mine was, but it's actually recessed into the head of the jig. So something like this will also work as long as you have that banana shaped head. That's really what's allowing it to work through the wood and come through that cover properly. Now, the next head shape that you're gonna see on the market is a football head shape. Something like this is exactly like it says. These things look identical to a football sideways. Now, the line tie on these can either be vertical and in line, or they can be at like a 60-degree and in line or flat as well. It really doesn't matter what the pull point is on the jig head. It just matters the shape of this head. So if it has that football shape, these are going to excel in rock cover. So if you have a bunch of rocks scattered on the bottom and you throw something with a very narrow head, it has a more likely chance of it getting wedged into every rock down there, even the very small ones, because it'll get into every little crevice. But if you have a football shaped head like this, because of that wide shape, it will deflect off of those crevices a little bit more and allow it to stay out of them and not get pinned in that piece of cover. Most of the time when you're losing your baits in rocks, you're not actually hooking the rocks with the hook of your bait. Your line is just getting wedged into a crevice and the head of the bait is doing the same and will not allow it to come out of that cover. So a football jig is going to shine in those scenarios to crawl through all of those pieces of cover. However, if you throw a football jig in grass or sometimes even wood, you're going to have a lot worse experience, especially grass. These things will catch every piece of grass that you throw this thing through. Just that wide head shape is basically going to gather all the grass and let it clump up on your line. So when you fish a football jig, you would never really want to fish this around some grass cover. And the last one you're gonna see on the market is some type of a swim jig. These ones will almost always have some type of a little keel on the head. It's not going to be as pronounced as that banana shape, but it's gonna have a slight keel to keep it tracking upright. The line ties will almost always be vertical and in line with the head to allow it to work through the grass. And the head itself will be bullet shaped or triangular to allow it to work through the grass. So something like this, prime example right here, if you were to throw this in rock cover like you did that football jig, these would get hung up immediately down there. They would get wedged into every little crevice because it can find its way through every little crevice. But when you're fishing around grass, this is the ideal scenario to let it work through every little blade of grass. So whether you're fishing lily pads or submerged vegetation or anything like that, if it is grass cover, this thing will snake its way through all of that because of how pointed that head shape is. Now this will work in wood a little bit as well. Pretty much all of these will work somewhat in wood, with the flipping jig working the best, but this one, if you're fishing around grass cover, this is the one you need to have tied on. It will get snagged the least out of everything. It will snake its way through and come through to where you get less snags and catch more fish. And the one big call out with all of these jigs is that the shape is the most important thing to pay attention to, but there will be other varieties within each of these categories. So with these swim jigs, you might have a full-size regular swim jig like this one here. This is a 6th Sense swim jig. Right next to it, you might have the Conda Finesse swim jig that is just a scaled down version of the same thing, but they still have a triangular shape with an inline line tie. When it comes to the flipping jigs, again, you have your regular 6th Sense hybrid jig that's a big flipping jig, 4 or 5/0 hook, full-size skirt, or something like the ones that I make here. These are very small flipping jigs, a much smaller weed guard, a much finesse cut skirt, and just a smaller size, but the head shape is the same. So no matter what jig you're looking at, they will all range greatly, but the 3 head shapes are going to determine where you fish that jig. So if it's pointed and in line, it's for grass. If it has a wide football shape, it's for rock. And if it has an arced banana shape, it's for wood. You can exchange them a little bit through each category, but those are where they excel the best. Next, we gotta talk about color when it comes to your jig. This is where you're gonna start mimicking the forage that you choose within that area. So if you're fishing around grass with a swim jig, you're probably going to be mimicking bluegill, golden shiners, or even shad. Now, if you're fishing a football jig offshore, you could be fishing bluegills or maybe even crawfish. So there's basically 4 main colors that I keep in my tackle box that are the base color, and then the accent colors can vary based on whatever I find on the tackle shelf at the time when I'm looking to buy that jig. So my number 1 color that I'm gonna use probably 75% of the time is going to be some type of a green pumpkin, just because it allows me to mimic the widest range of forage that these fish are feeding on. So if I'm looking to mimic bluegills, crawfish, other types of little bugs crawling on the bottom, or even perch and other type of sunfish that are up there, a green pumpkin type color is going to work great. Now, it doesn't matter if it's green pumpkin red like this one, or like a green pumpkin with some brown in it. It doesn't really matter what your accent color is, but something green pumpkin is going to work in the clear water all the way up to stained water when you're mimicking those types of forage. Now the next color that I'm going to have, this one is a staple for me when I'm fishing in stained to dirty water. And again, if I'm mimicking bluegills, crawfish, whatever, this is going to be my next choice again. A black, whether it's a black and blue like this guy here, black and red, black and purple, it does not matter what your accent color is, but something with a black base or just a pure black jig will work amazing in those very stained waters up to the dirtiest water that you can find. Ultimately, this will just look like the shadow or silhouette of whatever you're trying to mimic. So you don't have to worry about getting the color 100% perfect, because those fish will just see the shape, and this shape can mimic bluegills, crawfish, whatever it might be. So the shape is what's going to help you out there. Now, black is going to work basically in those dirtier waters. I don't necessarily use that once I get down to cleaner water. That's when that green pumpkin's going to come in. But if I had 2 colors, those would be the 2 right there, a green pumpkin and a black. Pick those ones and you're on a good start right there. But there's 2 more that I really like to add into the mix, depending upon what I'm doing. This one is going to be exclusively in my swim jig category. I won't have it in flipping jigs and I will not have it in football jigs, but some type of a white and chartreuse, pure white, a transparent white, whatever it might be. White is going to work great when you're trying to mimic shiners, shad, alewife, herring, whatever it might be up there in those grass patches. So sometimes those bait will get into those grass patches, lily pads, whatever, and you can't fish anything else through there that mimics bait fish. So a swim jig is an excellent one to work through there and mimic those bait fish. That's why I'll carry a white in the tackle box whenever I'm using a swim jig. And then the other color that I'm going to almost exclusively keep in my football jig colors, but sometimes a flipping jig as well, is going to be a brown. And again, it doesn't matter if it's brown and purple, brown and orange, just a plain brown. Something brown will work very well when you know those fish 110% are feeding on crawfish. If you're on a place that's pretty much all they eat, or you're in a river system and you know they're chasing crawfish down at that time or whatever it might be, that brown is going to help you mimic those crawfish. Pretty much every crawfish out there is a brownish green color and has some accent to it. Bonus points if you can figure out what those accent colors are. If your crawfish are brown and orange, if you can throw a brown and orange jig, you're going to have more success. But if you also just threw a plain brown one, you would still have success as well when they're feeding on those crawfish. So again, this one I keep as a very exclusive. I fish it a minimal amount of time as well, and it's usually only in a football jig or a flipping jig, but a brown can help you catch fish when they're feeding on those crawfish. And lastly, we have to talk about trailers for our jig, because that's where you're really gonna bring this jig to life. Choosing the right trailer can give you the most amount of success, but choosing the wrong trailer can also hinder what you're trying to do. Now there's 3 trailers that I really keep with me. Again, category wise, every company is going to have their own type of trailer within this category. But for me, the go-to staple that I will fish on all 3 of these jigs, no matter what time of year it is or what those fish are feeding on or which one of these jigs you choose, something in this category will fit and mimic that profile based on this shape. Now that's going to be just the standard crawfish profile. So something like this Rage Craw right here is an awesome choice. The 6th Sense Bongo or the Rage Menace. Baits like those that have those flapping crawfish trailers and a solid body to be able to feed it up onto your jig hook is what you're going to be looking for. And these things, again, open the options up endlessly on what you can do with your jig. You can put these on a flipping jig and just flip it and mimic bluegills and crawfish and let those claws flap on the way down. You can put it on a swim jig, either vertical, where the claws are vertical like this, or flat, and they'll flap and you can mimic bluegills and other bait fish swimming around up there shallow. You could even take a white swim jig and put a white crawfish on it and mimic shad with that deeper body profile. So no matter what your species of forage is that those fish are feeding on, there is a crawfish that will fit the bill for what you're looking for there. Match your shape and your color, whatever you're looking for that profile, and a crawfish will fit the bill for most of your jig fishing. So if you were looking to get just one trailer, find a crawfish you believe in and go ahead and put that thing on there and get the most amount of success. But if you want to go one step further, there's a couple other options you can put on your jig to get even more results and be a closer match to what those fish are feeding on. The first one is when I know those fish are feeding on crawfish, but also small bluegills, but the fish are really lethargic. Cold water, cold temperatures, the fish just really don't want to bite. I'm going to use a chunk style trailer, and I've talked about this on a jig that I've used before on this channel. I take a very finesse profile jig and thread the chunk style trailer on here to give it just enough bulk, but a very small snack-like profile to get even more bites from fish when fishing a jig. The chunk style trailer basically just has flat claws that do nothing. The other option for something like this would be like a beaver style bait. It's just a flat claw that doesn't do anything. You rig it up on there and it just falls straight. So when that fish is very lethargic, that's when I'm going to go to this chunk style trailer. And then the last one is pretty much an exclusive for me on my swim jigs, and that's gonna be a swim bait trailer. So something like a 3 to 4 inch soft plastic swim bait, if you know those fish are feeding on bluegills, golden shiners, perch, any type of bait fish, that's when you need to go to a swim bait. It's going to give it a more bait fish profile and presence, and it will get you more bites. You will eliminate the fact of mimicking crawfish with this presentation because a crawfish does not have a kicking tail. But if you know they're feeding on bait fish, you can go to a swim bait trailer and get more success. This will also allow it to come through the grass easier because a swim bait is very streamlined, just like your jig. So if you're looking for the absolute most weedless presentation that's mimicking bait fish when those fish are feeding on it, you better have a swim bait on the back of your swim jig and you'll have even more success. And while these tips will help you choose the right jig for your conditions, if you want to see my absolute favorite jig to fish out there, check this video out right here, hit the subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.